Okay, I know I started this recording a little late, but I'm just mentioning, important information about kind of what racial formation theory is. And like the main thing that I want you to know about is that race is a social construction. So again, that example that I was about to mention, a lot of kids were saying when they saw a video, right? Remember me talking about this, the example of like kids seeing like a different type of um, uh, it that's an interesting question, Zaya. I don't know. I'm not much of a biology expert to determine whether that analogy is correct or not. But I understand your style of thinking. But in a way, it is kind of somewhat correct with what you're saying, Zaya. Um, but as I was saying that, that example of kids, I'm talking about kids who maybe live in in poverty areas, may not be in the nicest places. So they have an idea of what black means, right? And this is the same thing for a lot of Latino, Hispanics, and other racial and ethnic groups, where they have an idea of what a Mexican is, of what a black person is, what an Asian person is, right? So they have this idea because that's what is constructed by people, right? It is that invention that I'm talking about. They look at this guy that's on this video, another black person, but guess what? He doesn't talk like them. He doesn't dress like them. So because of those two things and probably more reasons, right? Because of those things, they determined, oh, this is what they said, right? I'll never forget this. And I mentioned this before that, oh, he's one of those weird black dudes. He's one of those like out there, right? So he's already marginalized in that sense because he doesn't talk like the way they think black people should talk or dress the way they should dress, right? It challenged those ideas that were created by people. And because of that, right, because these people, because like this group of people view people who are virtually the same as them, right? Again, they look the same, all the physical characteristics are the same. Um, but because they're different, because their identity challenge how they view black people, then they are set aside, right? They are looked down upon. And that's what I mean by that is made real and consequential by humans, right? Because if it challenges an idea of who people are probably going to be like, you know, thrown off guard or upset or like, what? Like you do that? Like, or like I hear this a lot. People, a lot of kids tell me this, but at the high school, people say this to me. It's like, yeah, like I would feel bad because they would tell me that I sound white, right? I'm talking about like, other black students. They'd be like, oh, I sound white because of how I talk. Like that happens, right? Because it challenges this idea of how black people should talk. And again, this is the same thing for Mexicans and Hispanics about who Mexicans should be and how they should act, and other Latino groups, right? It is created by society and social institutions, right? Like the movies, the media, um, the government, even families, right? Families even determine like who they're supposed to be. I've had some aunts and uncles like, oh no, like, what, you don't like spicy food? Oh, then you're not a Mexican. No, I love spicy food, but at first I was very sensitive towards spicy food. They'd be like, you're not a real Mexican then. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a real Mexican. Watch me eat this habanero pepper right now. And I did, and it was a terrible idea, and I regret it to this day. So that is what racial formation theory is. Okay, I wanted to hit on that point. Does that make sense, everybody? Did I lose anybody? Does that make sense? Okay, thank you, Zaya. Appreciate you telling me. All right. Well, hopefully we are good. If not, here are just some straight up key points to remember on this slide, right? Racial categories are created, inhabited, transformed, and destroyed, right? And racial identities are socially, not biologically constructed. How you look, how you talk, how you dress, how you do whatever, right? That makes you you. You should not have a set idea of who you should be based on who you are. I mean, on like what you look like. That's what I'm to say. So
What's an ideology?
ideology is like a type of thinking, right, is your beliefs, your values, you know, how you perceive things, right? Like that's the best way I could put it, right? It's just how you view the world.
Oh,
Hmm.
okay.
Okay. So the newer information that, again, I'm only going to be covering 2 slides. Actually, one. I'm sorry. An example of what an actual racial formation is, right? I've covered this last time also. Probably hit on it again. When it happened to the Latinos, or I mean, well, back then, to the indigenous people, once the Spanish showed up, because again, it was purely all indigenous native people living in these areas, and then you have these white Europeans coming in. You have these two worlds now colliding with each other, and they talk about this in that Brazil video because it happened there a lot also, even past the colonial phase. So there now we got this mixture. Now we have all these other different groups of people from and who have different shades of colors, and again, for some reason that mattered here, or and that still matters, you know, to this day. But at that time it mattered also. So now we have straight up, you know, pure, not I don't say pure, but just like straight up like white Europeans, and we have again straight up black Africans, and the native people. So you have these two ends. I don't know if I can, if I'm like, yeah, whoops. You have like these two ends, right? What about all the people in the middle? Are they more this way? Are they more that way? What's going on? So the Spanish are like, okay, let's do this. The whitest will be up top, will be kind of the ones who control everything, right? You're born in Spain, right? Now you move to the new world, right? What is now New Spain, and eventually will be Mexico. And then past that will be like your children, the Creoles, right? If my parents are from Spain, they move to the new world, then they have me. I'm Spanish. I'm technically full on European, but I'm born in this new world. I'm a Creole, a Criollo. Those groups are probably like the top 2 groups because they were the whitest. But then you start dealing with, you know, the mixed races, right? Then you got the mestizos, the mixture of European indigenous. I said last time that whole large groups of people, especially Mexicans, are mestizos. Like a large percentage of them are mestizos. I'm probably a mestizo. Ethan, most likely you're a mestizo. Maximiliano, Max, you're probably a mestizo. Yareli, I'm sorry, I'm just calling you guys out. Anybody of Hispanic descent, especially if you're from Mexico, most likely you are a mestizo. Uh, if it's European blood mixed in with African blood, right, you have a mulatto. I think we talked about this before. Uzziah, I think you mentioned that according to this, you are a mulatto. And then after that, African Indian are known as Sambos. So this is what racial formation is, right? They took your physical appearance and they placed you in certain categories based again on on what you look like, right? So that's kind of what happened, and that's why like labels, this whole like even like this whole discussion of the Latino identity is so important. That's why we're having it today, because from the moment the whole Hispanic Latino group even like began to exist, they were placed in these categories based on who they were and where they come from, and that has not changed. What has changed is kind of how we see each other. You know, like we don't use these types of labels anymore. Mestizos most likely more, but they're not as common because that was a different time. And that's my point that I'm trying to make, right? Is that it is a social construction of race, right? Used to create and enforce legal restrictions. So like back in the day, right? With here during this time, right? They, based on what you look like, it affected how you got an education, whether you could own a home or even participate in politics, you know, actually be represented. So based on what you look like, that all affected how you're able to do, how you're able to do all of these things. Okay, so but now talking more in modern terms. Is everybody good though? Am I going too fast? Is everyone all right? Are we all good? Yeah. Okay. Alrighty then. Cool. I'm glad. Oh, cool beans. So I'm gonna blow your mind with this right now. I think I said this before also. It's so hard to remember what I said and what I haven't. It's like 2 days, like 2 days a week. But technically, in the eyes of the government, of our government, and in more specifically, like the survey that we take every 10 years, right? The one that just happened this year. I think it's still going on. Um, Technically, Latinos are considered white because remember, Latino, Latino or Hispanic, those are ethnicities. It is not your race because remember that anybody from any race can be a Hispanic or Latino from any race. But if you're like something like a mestizo, right, which is mostly a lot of people where you're like you definitely don't see yourself as white because you're not, right? You may have like a really dark skin color, um, maybe it's even still a little like lighter, but you know for a fact that like I'm not like a white person, but being a Mexican or Nicaraguan or Guatemalan or whatever, like that's your nationality. That's not a race either. So what are we race wise? What are we? Technically, you're white, white by law. And that is like a mentality that's been stayed for a while. So I wrote notes here about this court case called Hernandez versus Texas in 1954. Right? So the 1954 Supreme Court case, Hernandez versus Texas, is a good example in the ways in which Latinos come to complicate this whole idea of racial hierarchy, right? Of like, oh, white people up top, super dark black people at the bottom, right? That whole hierarchy type situation, right? Because Peter Hernandez was here, I'm reading down here, by the way, was a Mexican agriculture worker who was convicted of murder in Texas in the 1950s. However, his defense team came to challenge that conviction as they saw that Hernandez was not tried by a jury of his peers, as all jury members were white men. Because you remember, right, I just said at the time they counted other Latinos, other Hispanics as white people. But do you think that other white people are going to actually, especially during like the 50s, they're going to look at a Mexican and say that he's white also? Probably not, right? Right, especially during this time, especially in Texas, right, in a southern state. They're probably not going to look at him as a fellow white person. So they're not going to convict them fairly. And that's what they were arguing for. It's like, hey, Hernandez is not a white person. A lot of white people just judged him and he got convicted. Those are not his peers. So the case went up to the Supreme Court. Hernandez versus Texas finally acknowledged the distinctiveness of Mexican Americans in terms of their perceived racial identity and allowed them to be thought of as a protected group under the 14th Equal Amendment. On the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause of the United States. So basically saying that, okay, yeah, he may be seen as white, but we can't ignore the fact that he still belongs to a minority group, which are protected by the 14th Amendment, which protects people like him, right? The idea of it that he should be that you cannot discriminate against his group. So in the end result is guaranteed equal protection, even though they were seen as white. They guaranteed equal protection of all racial groups under the 14th Amendment and acknowledged the distinctiveness of Mexican Americans in terms of their perceived racial identity. So in the end, they said, okay, you guys should be protected under this amendment, and Mexican Americans, you guys are kind of like your own special case. It's like its own special case, its own thing, where we have to be aware of that in reality, you're not really white. Like we know for a fact that you're not white. So we'll take that into consideration for a lot of things. But in the end, though, legally, especially with the survey and all that, Mexican Americans and any other Latino group living in the US are technically considered white. but the fact that they are Mexican or Hispanic or Latino is not ignored, like it was to Hernandez. That was ignored, and that's why he was sent to prison. But remember, he challenged that and won. And that's how all this came to be. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Please let me know. It's okay if I see a no. I would love to see a no. Or even just a straight up IDK. The government is weird. A lot of things, yeah, a lot of things get mixed up. It's all in the wording for a lot of things. So yeah, this is a little complicated thing, but the main thing though, the main thing I want you to know about this court case is that Latinos, especially people like Mexican Americans, yes, they may be seen as legally white, but they are also a minority group with their own needs and should be kind of treated as a minority group because they are a minority group compared to actual white Americans. On paper, yes, they may be white. Legally, like by law, I guess. But the reality is that they're not. The reality is that they're still coming from a different culture, different, I don't know, I'm trying to put this like in the simplest terms, different culture, different environment and lifestyle. Maybe it probably was, maybe he was convicted at first because maybe he was a straight up murderer. But in the end, that's not what happened. But that's an interesting take on that. Okay, last thing, pros and cons of specific racial or ethnic identity. This question is one thing I want you to think about, and I'll kind of somewhat wrap it up there, but not, just give me a sec. Of everything that I've talked about with racial formation theory, everything that I said today and the information I said last week, right, is that there are historical points in which belonging to or identifying as a specific racial or ethnic pan-identity. What pan-identity means, like it encompasses a lot of people. So you're putting all of them together, right? So I'm talking about Latinos and Hispanics. That is a pan-identity because remember, it could literally be anybody, right? You're talking about a lot of people, right? If we're talking about a Latino, if you're a Latino or Hispanic, that can mean so many things. Remember, like background, culture, all of that. So putting them all together, right, is the pan-identity can be beneficial, such as political participation. And that is what Latinidad is. I don't have time to go over that. I do have some time, but not enough to me to like really go over it. So it is this concept of Latinidad, where, excuse me, if you're a Latino, if you're a Hispanic, right, we all have one thing in common. We need to stick together for political reasons. We want to be represented. We want to be heard. We want to make sure that that the government helps out our people, right? We come together, right? If we join forces rather than being separate little groups of like Hondurans, Guatemalans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, all of that, if we are all conjoined together, if we are a solid one force, we can make our voice heard. And that is what Latinidad is. And I'll break that down even more later on. But just based on what I told you on this Latinidad of us coming together, being part of this group, make sure that we are represented and heard. And again, I'm talking about all of these different groups of people, right? All of these large different groups of people coming together. How can identifying to a pan-Latino identity be seen as problematic or limiting? Why might that be a problem? Who can tell me really quickly? Remember, if we're coming together, if we're joining forces to make sure we're heard, but we're bringing in lots of different people in, how may that be problematic? or limiting? Anybody have an idea? Why might that be a problem? Okay, think about it this way. If you guys are throwing like a pizza party, right? If you're throwing a pizza party with a lot of people, think of like, I don't know. I can't think of a specific amount, but just like a lot of people, you know? Um, yeah, like 30 people, I guess. I don't know, more, lots. And you don't have any pizza, right? And they're like, "Oh my God, like, what are we gonna eat?" Everyone's like, "Oh, we're getting pizza, right? We're getting pizza." Everyone's like, "Everybody want pizza?" They're like, "Yeah, we want pizza." Everyone's together. Everybody wants the same thing. Cool, right? Everyone's on board, right? We want pizza. We want to eat. But then I ask, "Awesome, but what kind? What kind of pizza are we getting?" Do you guys understand my analogy? Why might that be so bad? Yeah, you will get a lot of different answers. You have a lot of different pizzas. And that is why things like this pan Latino identity, you could take a vote, Zaya, you can take a vote, but do you think that, I mean, even if you do end up winning, this pizza does end up winning, do you think the people, I mean, the other people who didn't vote for it, do you think they're going to be happy? Especially if like the pizza's like pineapple and ham? Exactly. Not everyone's going to be happy. And that is the problem with what Latinidad is. You have all these different Hispanic groups together, but they all have different needs and they all want different things. So things are gonna get a little problematic. Remember, we all want representation. We want food. We want all these things, right? Mexicans and Puerto Ricans are saying this, but then the Cubans are like, "Wait, hold on. Uh, I'm good on that. Can we get some of these though?" And then probably like Nicaraguans and Guatemalans would be like, "Wait, hold up, guys. Like okay, we're for that, but we can't forget about this." And then Mexicans are like, "Nah, dude, we don't need that. Like, who are you? Go away, dude. No one wants you." Right? Creates these divisions, creates these like little mini inner conflicts between groups. Same way, everybody in that party could probably not agree on what kind of pizza they want. And that is this problem with this pan identity. Um, Food for thought, something for you to really think about, especially by the time we get to our topic next week. We're gonna dive now. I know it's already 11:43, but next week we're gonna wrap this Latino identity unit up, and it's like a good segue for us, especially talking about history things, to go and talk more about the history aspect of it all. Um, Giving you a little preview, we talked about these terms already, right? So we should be here. These will be our new terms that we'll be discussing next week, right? Because they will be more focused on, right, Latinidad, with what we just talked about. We already talked about racial formation, but these will be our next topics. Okay, so homework should be posted already. Check that out. Very self-explanatory. The checklist of everything we've covered so far. Okay, if you don't know those questions or you don't know how to answer them, Google Classroom. All the information can be found there.